Welcome back, everyone. Another year, another set of videos that we have to do, and honestly, I'm always excited to talk about these older phones and older iPhones, Androids, and everything, especially these Samsung Galaxies. And Samsung has been on a pretty good streak with their S lineup recently. I will definitely say since the Galaxy S8, they've been killing it, even with the S7. Now, with a phone like the Samsung Galaxy S8, when it first came out in 2017, which was 4 years ago if you consider it already being 2021, but not quite, it's like 3 years and like 10 months. This phone was a pretty big redesign at that time because before we still had home buttons and stuff. At this time, they switched away from that for the nav bar buttons and all that stuff. And I feel like this is one of those phones that had so much hidden potential that Samsung could have easily kept supporting this thing, and they decided not to, and that's really my only downside of this phone, believe it or not, is that they didn't keep supporting this phone. Since then, this year or 2020, we had huge improvements. Samsung went ahead and improved their software lifecycle, adding an extra year, which is cool, but I really wish the Samsung Galaxy S8 could have had it as well. Now, I will find the cheapest Galaxy S8 and link it down below in the description. You can get it from there and help support the channel at the same time, but I will, recommend that if you can pull together a little bit more money, picking up like a Galaxy S10e or a Galaxy S10 may be a better deal for a lot of people, and I'll go ahead and leave one of those linked down below too. Now, on the front of the Galaxy S8, you still have a very beautiful and very capable 1440p panel that's 5.8 inches, and it sounds like I'm a salesman of the Galaxy S8, even though I don't even think anybody's talking about this phone that much anymore. And this is, in my opinion, by far one of the best features of the Samsung Galaxy S8. When you have a phone of this caliber with this type of panel, the curved edges, the beautifulness of it, it really makes you think like how much better could Samsung have done at that time. And that's exactly what I was thinking when this phone first came out. But obviously, a lot of things have changed, and we've now gotten whole punch displays and stuff. But this is a very good panel still. And when I look at this phone and I look at like the iPhone 12 Pro, or I look at like a Galaxy S20, sometimes I'm like, this panel is still pretty comparable. Obviously, I don't think it beats any of those panels, but it's still pretty impressive for this being a 2017 device. Now, you have a little bit of bezel on the top and bottom, but it's totally understandable. This was a 2017 device. You have IP certification on this phone as well, so that's another humongous thing to keep in mind. And you have a microSD card slot on this phone too. Two things about this phone that kill it. It's just one of the best assets: IP certification and microSD card slot. Doesn't really get much better than that in my opinion. Now, you still have USB Type-C and a headphone jack on this phone as well, which if it couldn't get any better, there we go, we have even more features. And on the back, we have the standard glass back, which I like. It's not frosted or anything, but even in this day and age, it's totally okay. I have no problems with the glass back at all. And I'll definitely tell you, holding this phone in the hand, it just makes this phone this phone does not feel aged at all. If Samsung released a phone this year with this type of build quality, with even the panel itself and how it looks and everything, I would say that this is still a really good flagship type of device. This still feels like a flagship, so it has a very good panel. Maybe I would only have two complaints in terms of the way it feels and the way it may perform is the lack of 120 Hz refresh rate on the panel and maybe lack of extra camera sensors. Other than that, this is still almost like a flagship type of device. Now, since we are already on the back, let's go and hit on the camera. This thing, like I said before, does have a single 12 megapixel sensor on the back, and you can only do 4K 30 frames per second on it. There's no telephoto, there's no ultra wide sensor, there's no micro lidar sensor, whatever. But I will tell you, for what this phone had at that time in 2017, early 2017 at that, I think it's totally okay. In the market, I think at that time, at least in my understanding, there wasn't really a ton of phones that had dual camera setups. We had the 7 Plus that came out a couple months before this. So for this phone only having single camera, I think is okay for the most part. It's not like a crazy big deal. However, I think with the S9 only having one camera setup, that's a bigger deal. But this one, totally understandable. But I will tell you, in this day and age, this is still a pretty decent camera setup. Like, this is not an ugly camera by any means. This camera still has some capability. And I will be honest, and I love saying this type of stuff, Samsung puts so many features in their camera setup that even with their last update of One UI that this thing got, there were more features in that camera setup than when it first came out, which is huge, and I love seeing that. We got more features, and even I would say this phone has more features in the camera than a lot of iPhones that came out this year too, or last year, and that's a pretty big thing. Obviously, I'd rather have an iPhone camera that came out last year than this one, but we still have a lot of cool features, and it gets even better because within the App Store, there's a lot of apps that you can go ahead and edit your photos up and all that good stuff. Even Instagram, TikTok, they allow you to edit a lot of your videos and photos and stuff. So the back camera of this thing is definitely a pretty decent camera in this day and age. However, the front camera, it's only an 8 megapixel sensor, so that definitely isn't a great camera camera and even the megapixel count sways it a little bit because in my opinion, it's really not that great. The front camera is probably my biggest problem with this type of device, but I still think it's totally okay for the time being. And even beyond that, if you're making TikToks and stuff, this phone is going to be perfectly fine. But if you're expecting to get like the best quality photos and videos, it may be better for you to, kind of look in a different direction, with like maybe like a S10 or, S10e like I stated on the low end. But still, this camera I think is okay for the most part. And I'll probably rate it probably like it's 8 out of 10 for being a 2017 phone in my opinion. And that's a pretty good score. So in terms of the camera setup, that pretty much covers it up. Now, one of the worst aspects of this device would probably be the software. This thing started off with Android 7.0. It ended with Android 9.0, so it only got like 2 versions of Android and that was it. And that was this phone's biggest problem, I think, at that time and even now. It just saddens me. This phone could have probably, lasted up until right now with One UI 3. It didn't get it though, which is very sad. So what does this mean for the longevity of this phone? Well, I think it's still getting security updates here and there, but for pretty much the rest of the year, it's not really getting any more software updates. It's pretty much stuck where it's at. And I guess that's okay, but this phone could have easily, lasted a lot longer. And you can't even custom ROM 95% of the models in America for this thing. So that's another huge problem. And there's just not that big of a development community behind it either. So that's another huge, sad thing about it. You can still get custom launchers and all that stuff, but honestly, I would have probably been a lot better and felt a lot better had this thing gotten Android 10. But honestly, it is what it is. So in terms of software, that covers it up. Performance-wise though, this thing does have the Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 chipset inside of it, an octa-core CPU, an Adreno 540 GPU, and 4 gigabytes of RAM. There's only one model of this device, which is okay. Like I said, it had a micro SD card slot. And what's funny is that typically when I talk about these type of phones, like I already know in the back of my head that it is a slower phone. It doesn't have the most amount of capabilities. It is, a bit dated, so it's not going to be smooth or anything like that, or as smooth as something that came out this year. But honestly, the panel itself, the way it performs and everything, it just gives me the illusion that it actually may be a lot faster than what it is. And what's funny is that I compared it to a lot of phones throughout this year, 2019 or, 2020 and 2019 and all that stuff. And I found that the S8 was still pulling up some really good numbers and pulling up apps and, really surprising me with how good the performance was of the Galaxy S8. I think I compared it to the iPhone 12. I compared it to the iPhone 11 Pro. I compared it to the S10, the S20s, the Note 20s, and honestly, this phone had done a really good job at that time. And even going into 2021, it's still a pretty good performing phone. I think the things that really, or the problems with it is the RAM. I feel like the RAM probably is the bigger problem with it. If I needed to, I could probably go day to day and use this phone perfectly fine. Now, would I love it? I don't know if I would love it, but I don't know if I would hate it. I would be very probably like in the middle of it. But I think for day to day use, this phone has a lot of capability still, and I think the performance is still there. Now, with that being said, it does kind of glitch up a lot. The RAM management, like I said, isn't that great. So if you put a bunch of apps in the background and you try to go back in them, it's not necessarily going to give you the best experience ever. It definitely is going to show you, a lot of glitchiness and all that kind of stuff. But as I said before with a lot of other phones, once the apps are loaded, once you're on Snapchat or you're on Instagram or whatever, it's smooth sailing for the most part. You're going to have a pretty good experience. It just so happens that when you go ahead and take it up a notch and you try to do a bunch of crazy things and play a bunch of big games, you're probably going to run into some problems. But I think for the most part, you're probably going to have a okay experience when it comes down to the whole entire performance of this phone. So performance wise, I'd probably give it maybe like a 7 out of 10, maybe, for being a 4-year-old phone as of this point. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 3000 milliamp battery, which in this day and age isn't really that big of a battery size. It has wireless charging, which is great, but it's still actually a pretty okay battery life. I think my battery has degraded quite a bit, and since my phone isn't in the best, condition, it kind of makes sense. But I'd probably, say this battery life is fairly average. Again, it's not the best, it's not the worst. It's very down in the middle, but that's pretty much what I would kind of give the score for this specific phone. So to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, is the Samsung Galaxy S8 still worth it in 2021? Well, what I can tell you is that this phone, like I said before, still has a lot of capability. I think there's a lot of pros. There's a few cons, but I really don't think it's that bad of a phone. I feel like the few cons that there are really could sway somebody, one side to the other. They're pretty big cons, but there's only a few of them. First of all, the build quality of this phone is beautiful. This phone still feels like a flagship phone. Whenever I pick this thing up, I take it out of my pocket if I ever, compare it against one phone to the other. This phone feels just the same, if not even better than a lot of the phones that I've compared it to. I mean, this phone's build quality is beautiful. It still feels really good. The panel on it is freaking amazing. It looks so good. I have really, there's really the best thing about the newer panels is that they have their higher refresh rates, they have less bezel, but this is still a really good panel for the most part. And if you don't care about the, the bezels and all that, this is a really, really good panel. You have the micro SD card slot, which is huge. You have USB Type-C with Samsung DeX, which is huge. And you have a headphone jack, which is also extremely huge on this type of phone. I mean, this is like a 4-year-old phone as at this point, but it still has all these peripherals and these IOs, which is really cool. You have a pretty okay camera setup. You have an okay back camera. The front camera is a little bit different, but you have an okay back camera, which is nice. The performance is still pretty good too, but and it's fairly cheap, as I stated before. But the cons, like I stated before, can really sway one person, even if it's one of them. And the biggest, con in my opinion is the software. The software just isn't there. One UI 3 would have been cool. One UI 2 would have been cool. Custom ROM support would have been cool. This phone does not have either of those. This phone stopped at Android 9. We are now on Android 11, so this thing is already outdated. Within the next year or two, a lot of app manufacturers are not going to be supporting apps for Android Pie either, so that's another pretty big thing to keep in mind. So take that as you will. I'm not trying to sway, one person one way or another, but that's a pretty big deal. But however, a lot of these apps are still getting support through the App Store, so you're perfectly fine there. And it's not like you're super outdated. It's not like you're on Android 4 or anything like that. You still have IP certification on this phone too, which is really, really nice. And for a phone that, for somebody who doesn't really care too much about, whatever, this is a perfect phone for those type of people. But if you want a little bit more power, if you want way more power, if you want a phone that's going to last much longer than this phone is still supported, getting a phone like a Samsung Galaxy S10e or Samsung Galaxy S10 will definitely do you much better in the long run, in my opinion. And like I said before, I'll go ahead and leave those linked down below as well. With the Galaxy S8, you can go ahead and kind of choose whichever one you want from there, from my recommendation, but you don't have to get them from there either. You can help support the channel at the same time if you do it. That's really pretty much it, guys. If you have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit the subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.